The shuttle docked at station with a soft hiss, and Danny Cole stepped onto the platform with a small bag over his shoulder. He had traveled for 3 weeks to reach the galactic core, and now he stood in the largest entertainment complex in known space. The Nexus Arena rose before him like a mountain of glass and light, and somewhere inside that building, the greatest fighters in the galaxy were preparing for the Eternal Combat Tournament. Danny was not a large man. He stood at 5'10" with a lean build and calm brown eyes. His hands were rough from years of work in the mining colonies of Titan, and his knuckles carried scars from fights that had no rules and no referees. He was 28 years old, and he had come to do something that no human had ever done before. Santos walked beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd. She was his coach and manager, a former military combat instructor who had found him 3 years ago in a bar fight on Europa. She had watched him take down 4 men twice his size using nothing but timing and intelligence, and she had known immediately that he was special. The aliens around them stopped and stared. A group of tall warriors pointed at Danny and made sounds that their translators rendered as laughter. A cluster of insect-like clicked their mandibles in what seemed like amusement. Everywhere Danny looked, he saw creatures that towered over him, creatures with claws and fangs and armored skin, and all of them were looking at him like he was a joke. "They have never seen a human competitor," said quietly. "We have only been a spacefaring species for 80 years. To them, we are children." Danny nodded but said nothing. He had expected this reaction. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as fragile creatures from a small planet in an unremarkable solar system. They lived short lives. They had no natural weapons. They could not breathe underwater or survive in vacuum or regenerate lost limbs. By every measure that mattered to the galactic community, humans were one of the weakest intelligent species ever discovered. The registration hall was a vast chamber filled with fighters from over 200 species. Danny took his place in line behind a creature that looked like a walking tank, its body covered in metal-hard plates and its arms ending in natural blades. The creature turned and looked down at Danny, then made a rumbling sound that the translator called laughter. "Little soft thing," the creature said. "Are you lost? The observation deck is on level 40. Danny looked up at the creature and smiled politely. "I am here to register for the tournament." The creature stared at him for a long moment, then laughed again, louder this time. Other fighters nearby turned to look, and soon the laughter spread through the hall like a wave. Danny stood in the middle of it with his hands at his sides, his expression unchanged. Squeezed his shoulder. "Let them laugh," she whispered. "It will make the victory." The registration process took 2 hours. Danny provided his biological data, his combat history, and his species classification. The official processing his application was an ancient named commissioner, a creature with gray skin and 4 eyes that held barely concealed contempt. "Human," said, reading from his screen. "Approximately 80 years, no natural armor, no venom, no enhanced strength, pain threshold listed as moderate." He looked up at Danny with something like pity. "Are you certain you wish to proceed? The tournament waiver clearly states that death is a common outcome." "I am certain," Danny said. Shrugged his narrow shoulders and pressed a button. "Your registration is complete. May whatever gods your species believes in have mercy on you." That evening, the pre-tournament ceremony took place in the main arena. Thousands of spectators filled the floating observation pods, and billions more watched on broadcasts across the galaxy. Danny stood with the other competitors on the arena floor, a small figure surrounded by giants. The ceremony reached its climax when the reigning champion entered the arena. His name was the Unbroken, and he had held the championship for 47 consecutive cycles. He was a warrior, standing 9 feet tall with 4 muscular arms and scales that could stop a blade. He had never lost a single round in his entire career. His opponents either surrendered or died, and most chose death rather than face the shame of yielding to him. Walked to the center of the arena and raised all 4 arms to accept the cheers of the crowd. Then he turned to face the assembled competitors, and his eyes scanned them slowly, dismissively, until they landed on Danny. The champion laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the arena. He walked toward Danny, each step shaking the floor until he stood directly in front of the human. Danny had to crane his neck to look up at him. "This is the human," said, his voice booming through the arena speakers. "This is what their species sends to challenge me." He reached down and placed one massive hand on Danny's shoulder, and the weight of it was enormous. "I select this one as my first opponent. I will demonstrate why some species should remain." The crowd erupted in cheers and laughter. The gambling odds were announced moments later, 10,000 to 1 against Danny surviving the first round. Several species began placing bets on exactly how many seconds he would last. The most popular prediction was 4 seconds. Danny stood quietly as the mockery washed over him, watched his face and saw something in his eyes that worried her. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was something cold and calculating, something that reminded her of the night she had first found him. Later in his quarters, Danny sat in front of a screen and watched archived footage of previous fights. He watched them over and over again, his eyes tracking every movement, every pattern, every habit. Brought him food that he barely touched. She tried to talk to him, but he only nodded and continued watching. "Danny," she finally said, sitting beside him, "what are you thinking?" He paused the footage on a frame showing in mid-attack. "I am thinking that he has fought the same way for 47 cycles. I am thinking that no one has ever challenged him properly, because everyone is too afraid of his size and his reputation." He turned to look at her, and his calm brown eyes held a certainty that made her breath catch. "I am thinking that tomorrow, the galaxy is going to learn something new about humans." The next morning, Danny walked through the tunnel toward the arena floor. He could hear the crowd already celebrating inevitable victory. He could hear the laughter and the cheers and the countdown to his expected death. He stepped into the light, and 50,000 aliens looked down at him with amusement and contempt. Across the arena, stood waiting with all 4 arms crossed over his chest, a smile on his scaled face. Danny took his position and waited for the match to begin. The signal for round 1 came as a deep tone that vibrated through the arena floor. 50,000 spectators leaned forward in their floating observation pods, eager to watch the quick execution of the tiny human. The broadcast networks reported that viewership had reached 2 billion across the galaxy, most of them tuning in specifically to see how fast the champion would destroy his opponent. The Unbroken stood in the center of the arena, making a theatrical show of stretching his 4 massive arms. He rolled his neck, producing cracks that echoed through the speakers, and flexed his clawed hands. He did not bother to take a fighting stance. He did not need one. In 47 cycles of competition, he had never faced an opponent worth respecting. Danny Cole moved into a position that made the crowd laugh harder. He dropped low, bending his knees deeply and bringing his center of gravity close to the ground. His arms hung loose at his sides. To the aliens watching, it looked like a prey animal preparing to run. The commentators called it a fear response. One of them joked that the human had forgotten which direction the exit was. Santos watched from the competitor observation area, her hands gripping the railing so hard that her knuckles turned white. She had trained Danny for 3 years. She had watched him develop techniques that no one in the galaxy had ever seen. But watching him stand there, so small against the giant, she felt her confidence waver for the first time. Began his attack with his signature opening move. He charged forward with all the speed his massive body could produce, and his 4 arms spread wide to create a cage of muscle and claw. This technique had ended hundreds of matches. Once those arms closed around an opponent, there was no escape. The crushing pressure would disable or kill within seconds. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the satisfying crunch. Danny did not retreat. He did not try to dodge to the side. Instead, he did something that made no sense to anyone watching. He stepped directly into the charge. Time seemed to slow as Danny slid beneath grasping arms. His body moved through the tiny gap between the champion's lower arms, a space that should have been too small for any creature to fit through. But Danny was not fighting the way galactic species fought. He was fighting the way humans fought, using angles and timing and a flexibility that came from millions of years of hunting prey larger than themselves. Danny's hands found their targets before could react. He struck the neural clusters in the champion's left underarm joints, soft spots where the scales parted to allow movement. These were not vital areas. Galactic medicine considered them too minor to bother protecting. No fighter had ever targeted them because no fighter had ever thought to look for them. His left arms went limp. They dropped to his sides like dead weight, and the champion stumbled forward, thrown off balance by the sudden loss of control. A sound escaped his throat that the translators could not process. The arena fell completely silent. Danny did not pause to appreciate the moment. He moved around his body like water flowing around a stone, staying close, where the champion's remaining arms could not reach effectively. He struck again and again, targeting specific points that he had identified from hours of studying the archived footage. Tried to turn, tried to grab the human that was somehow always behind him, but Danny used the champion's own momentum against him, applying principles of leverage that alien species found counterintuitive. When pushed, Danny pulled. When grabbed, Danny redirected. Every movement the champion made was turned into a weapon against himself. The second pair of arms began to fail. Danny had found the neural clusters there as well, and his strikes were precise and devastating. Roared in frustration and pain, swinging wildly with his remaining functional arm, but the human was never where he expected. The crowd watched in stunned disbelief as the greatest champion in galactic history was systematically dismantled by a creature half his size. The commentators had stopped speaking. The gamblers had stopped calculating odds. Everyone simply stared at the arena floor, trying to understand what they were seeing. Danny finished the round with a sweeping kick that took legs out from under him. The champion crashed to the arena floor with an impact that shook the entire structure. He lay there with 3 of his 4 arms disabled, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with something that looked like terror. Danny stood over him, breathing evenly, without a single scratch on his body. The timer for round 1 had not even completed. 60 seconds had been allocated. Only 43 had passed. The silence stretched on for a long moment. Then Commissioner's voice came through the speakers, demanding an immediate medical review. The human must have used illegal technology, he declared. No biological creature could accomplish this without assistance. Medical drones descended to the arena floor and began scanning both fighters. Danny stood still and allowed them to examine every part of his body. He had nothing to hide. He had used nothing but his hands and his feet and his understanding of his opponent. The medical review took 15 minutes. During that time, the crowd began to murmur, then to argue, then to shout. Some demanded that the match be declared invalid. Others demanded that it continue. A very few, began to look at Danny with something other than contempt. The results came back clean. The human had used no technology, no chemicals, no enhancement of any kind. His victory was purely physical and purely tactical. Commissioner announced the results with obvious reluctance. Round 1 goes to the human competitor. The match will continue tomorrow with round 2. Was waiting for Danny when he walked out of the arena. Her eyes were wet, though she would never admit to crying. She grabbed him and held him tightly, and he let her. "How did you know?" she whispered. "How did you know those spots would work?" Danny pulled back and looked at her with his calm brown eyes. Every creature has weaknesses. The bigger they are, the more weaknesses they have. You just have to be willing to look. He glanced back at the arena where medical teams were still working on. He spent 47 cycles fighting opponents who were afraid of him. He never had to learn. He never had to adapt. He just had to show up and be frightening. They walked through the station corridors, and Danny noticed that the laughter had stopped. The aliens who had mocked him that morning now watched him pass with uncertainty in their eyes. A few stepped back to give him room. 1 or 2 nodded in what might have been respect. The gambling odds were recalculated that evening. They dropped from 10,000 to 1 against Danny to 50 to 1. It was still heavily in his favor, but it was the largest single shift in tournament history. In his quarters, Danny watched the replay of round 1. He watched himself move through his defenses, and he studied every detail with the same intensity he had shown before the match. There would be no celebration tonight. There would only be preparation. Because Danny knew something that the galaxy did not yet understand. Round 1 had been the easy part, would not make the same mistakes twice. The champion would study and learn and adapt. Round 2 would be something entirely different. Danny turned off the screen and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. The morning after round 1, Danny Cole woke to find that everything had changed. His communicator showed thousands of messages from across the galaxy. News networks wanted interviews. Scientists wanted to study him. Fighters from dozens of species wanted to know his secrets. He ignored them all and went to find breakfast. The station cafeteria fell silent when he entered. Creatures that had laughed at him yesterday now watched him with careful eyes. Danny took his food and sat alone at a small table, eating slowly while he thought about what came next. A female approached his table. She was tall and slender with pale blue skin and large dark eyes. Her name was Physician, and she had been assigned to examine both fighters after round 1. She carried a data pad in her long fingers. "May I sit?" she asked. Danny nodded, and she lowered herself into the chair across from him. "I have studied your biological data," said. "I have been trying to understand how you did what you did yesterday. Your species has no natural advantages. Your strength is below average. Your speed is nothing remarkable. Your senses are limited compared to most galactic species." She paused, her dark eyes searching his face. "And yet you defeated the greatest warrior in the galaxy in less than 1 minute." Danny continued eating. "What do you want to know?" Everything leaned forward. "I want to understand what makes humans different, because something is different, something that our databases do not capture." Danny set down his utensil and thought for a moment. "Do you know what a persistence hunter is?" Shook her head. "On Earth, millions of years ago, humans survived by chasing animals until they collapsed from exhaustion. We could not run faster than them. We could not overpower them, but we could keep going longer than they could. We would follow them for hours, sometimes days, until they simply could not run anymore." He looked at her with his calm brown eyes. "That is what makes us different. We do not give up. We endure, and we learn." Recorded his words on her data pad, her expression thoughtful. "The concept is difficult to translate. Most species optimize for immediate effectiveness. The idea of winning through extended suffering is not common in galactic evolutionary history." "That is why they underestimate us," Danny said. "They see a weak creature with no claws and no armor, and they assume we are prey. They do not understand that we spent millions of years being prey, and that experience taught us how to become the most dangerous hunters on our planet." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the cafeteria entrance. A young warrior pushed through the crowd, his 4 arms held close to his body in a gesture of submission. He was smaller than, probably not yet fully grown, and his scales were a lighter shade of green. His name was, and he had idolized the champion since childhood. Stopped at Danny's table and lowered himself to one knee, a gesture of deep respect and culture. The other aliens in the cafeteria stared in shock. "Teacher," said, using a formal term that the translator rendered with difficulty, "I watched round 1. I watched you defeat the Unbroken with nothing but your body and your mind. I have questioned everything I believed about strength and power." He looked up at Danny with desperate eyes. "How does a creature so small defeat a creature so large?" Danny studied the young warrior for a moment. "Stand up. There is no need to kneel." Rose but kept his eyes lowered. "Will you teach me? Will you show me how humans fight?" "I cannot teach you in one day," Danny said, "but I can tell you the most important lesson, the one that never learned." Leaned forward eagerly. "Size and strength are tools," Danny said. "They are useful tools, but they are not the only tools. Intelligence is a tool. Patience is a tool. The willingness to suffer is a tool. A fighter who relies only on strength will eventually meet someone who has learned to use all the other tools." He paused. "Your champion has been fighting with one tool for 47 cycles. He never needed anything else because his opponents were too afraid to make him work for his victories. That made him weak in ways he does not understand." Absorbed these words in silence, then bowed deeply, and the cafeteria remained quiet long after he left. Found Danny an hour later in the station's observation deck. She looked troubled, her jaw set in a hard line. "We need to talk," she said. "I received a visit last night. Commissioner came to my quarters personally." Danny turned from the window where he had been watching ships move through the station's docking bays. "What did he want?" "He offered me a bribe, a significant one, 10 million galactic credits if I convince you to withdraw from the tournament." His voice was tight with controlled anger. "He said there are powerful interests that depend on remaining champion, political interests, economic interests, species that have built their entire reputation on dominance." Danny nodded slowly. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him to leave before I broke his arms." Moved to stand beside him at the window. "Danny, this is bigger than just a tournament. If you win, you will not just be defeating a fighter. You will be changing the way the entire galaxy sees humanity. There are people who do not want that to happen." "I know," Danny said quietly. "I knew from the moment I entered this tournament that it was never just about fighting. It was about proving that we belong here, that we are not the weak, fragile creatures they think we are." He looked at her with determination in his eyes. "I am not going to withdraw." Smiled, but there was worry behind it. "I never thought you would, but I need you to understand that is not the only enemy now. There are forces working against you that a punch cannot defeat." That evening, news reached them that had been seen in the training facilities. He had worked for 18 hours straight, longer than he had trained in years. He had studied human combat footage. He had practiced against speed rather than strength. The champion who had coasted on his natural advantages was finally taking an opponent seriously. Danny received this news without reaction. He had expected nothing less. "He will be different tomorrow," said. "He will not make the same mistakes." "I know," Danny said, "but he still has not learned the most important thing about humans." "What is that?" Danny looked out the window at the stars beyond the station. Somewhere out there, billions of kilometers away, was the small blue planet where his species had learned to survive against impossible odds, where they had faced predators and ice ages and their own violent nature and had somehow endured. "We have been fighting stronger opponents for our entire existence," he said. "Every generation of humans has faced something that should have destroyed us, and we are still here." He turned to face her. "Thinks he can become dangerous by training for one day, but humans have been dangerous for 3 million years. That is not something you can learn in 18 hours. Nodded slowly. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be harder than today." Danny returned to his quarters and lay in the darkness, thinking about round 2. He knew it would be painful. He knew it would hurt him badly. The champion was too skilled and too strong to be defeated without cost. But Danny also knew something that did not yet understand. Pain was just another tool, and humans had learned to use it better than any species in the galaxy. He closed his eyes and let sleep take him. Tomorrow, he would show them what human endurance truly meant. The arena was packed beyond capacity for round 2. Every observation pod was filled, and thousands more watched from standing areas that had been hastily constructed to meet demand. The broadcast networks reported that viewership had tripled since round 1. 5 billion creatures across the galaxy were watching, waiting to see if the human could repeat his impossible victory. Danny Cole walked through the tunnel toward the arena floor, and this time there was no laughter. The crowd watched him in tense silence, uncertain what to expect from the creature who had humiliated their champion. Some still hoped to see him destroyed. Others had begun to wonder if they were witnessing something historic. The Unbroken was already waiting in the arena. The medical teams had repaired his neural damage, and all 4 of his arms moved with full strength and coordination. But something about him had changed. His posture was lower, more defensive. His eyes tracked Danny's movements with an intensity that had been absent in round 1. This was not the arrogant champion who had selected the human as an easy first victim. This was a predator who had learned to respect its prey. The signal came, and round 2 began. Did not charge. He moved forward carefully, keeping his arms positioned to block the angles that Danny had exploited before. He had studied the footage. He had trained against speed. He was fighting defensively for the first time in decades, using his reach advantage to keep the human at distance. Danny recognized the change immediately. The easy targets were gone, had learned. They circled each other for the first 30 seconds, testing distances, looking for openings. The crowd grew restless. They had expected immediate violence, not this careful dance. Danny made the first move, darting forward with the same speed he had shown in round 1, but was ready. One massive arm swept down and caught Danny across the chest, sending him flying backward. He hit the arena floor hard and rolled to absorb the impact, coming up in a crouch. The crowd roared. First blood belonged to the champion. Watch from the observation area, her hands pressed against the barrier. She had warned Danny that this would happen, was too skilled to be beaten with the same tricks twice. The real test was beginning now. Danny attacked again, and again intercepted him. The champion's 4 arms created a wall of muscle that seemed impossible to penetrate. Every time Danny found an opening was there to close it. Every time Danny tried to get inside his guard, he was thrown back. The hits accumulated. Danny took a strike to his shoulder that numbed his left arm. He took a kick to his ribs that cracked at least 2 of them. He took a glancing blow to his head that made his vision blur for a dangerous moment. Human blood appeared on the arena floor. The sight shocked the audience. Many species had assumed that humans were too fragile to continue fighting after significant injury. They expected Danny to collapse, to surrender, to admit that his round 1 victory had been a fluke. Instead, he kept moving. He kept attacking. He kept getting up every time knocked him down. The commentators began discussing human physiology with new interest. They talked about adrenaline, the chemical that flooded the human body during stress and suppressed pain signals. They talked about human endurance, the ability to continue functioning long after other species would shut down. They talked about the strange evolutionary path that had created a creature that could absorb punishment and keep fighting. Landed a devastating blow that cracked two more of Danny's ribs. The sound was audible through the arena speakers. Danny staggered, and for a moment it looked like he would fall. The crowd leaned forward, sensing the end. But Danny did not fall. He straightened slowly, one hand pressed against his damaged ribs and looked at with eyes that held no surrender. Blood ran down his face from a cut above his eye. His breathing was labored and painful. He was hurt badly, hurt in ways that would have ended most species. And he kept fighting. Something changed in his expression. The confidence that had returned after his successful defense began to waver. He had hurt the human severely, more severely than any opponent in years. But the human was still standing, still attacking, still looking at him with those calm, determined eyes. For the first time in 47 cycles, felt something he did not recognize. It took him a moment to identify it because he had never experienced it in competition before. It was fear. He had faced opponents larger than himself. He had faced opponents with natural weapons that could cut through his scales. He had faced opponents with poisons and acid and every other biological advantage the galaxy could produce. None of them had frightened him because none of them could outlast him. But this human would not stop. This human seemed to grow more dangerous as he became more damaged. This human looked at death and did not flinch. Danny saw the fear in his eyes, and he used it. He began moving differently, exaggerating his injuries, making himself look weaker than he was. He stumbled when he did not need to stumble. He dropped his guard at moments when could see him. He acted like a creature on the edge of collapse. Saw the weakness and pressed his advantage. He moved forward aggressively, abandoning some of his defensive caution to finish the human quickly. His arms swung with devastating force, each blow intended to end the match. But Danny was not as weak as he appeared. He slipped past attacks by margins so small they seemed impossible. He let the champion believe he was winning while he conserved his energy and waited for the right moment. The round timer showed 10 seconds remaining. Danny made his move. He ducked under a sweeping arm and drove his fist into the same neural cluster he had targeted in round 1. His left arm spasmed. The champion roared and swung wildly, but Danny was already moving to the next target. The timer reached 0. Round 2 ended. Both fighters stood in the arena, breathing hard. Danny was badly hurt, his body covered in bruises and cuts, his ribs screaming with every breath. But he was still standing, and despite all his strength and skill, had not managed to knock him down for good. The crowd sat in stunned silence. They had watched the human take a beating that would have killed most species, and they had watched him keep fighting. They had watched him turn his own injuries into a weapon, using his apparent weakness to draw the champion into mistakes. Commissioner announced the round as a draw. Neither fighter had achieved a decisive victory. The match would continue with round 3, which would determine the final outcome. Was waiting when Danny emerged from the arena. Her face was pale with concern as she looked at his injuries. "You need medical attention," she said. "Some of those ribs might have punctured something." Danny shook his head slowly. "After round 3, I cannot show weakness now." "This is not about showing weakness. This is about surviving." Danny looked at her with eyes that burned with quiet determination. "Do you know what I saw in his face at the end? He was afraid. The greatest champion in the galaxy looked at me and felt fear." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "That fear will grow tonight. It will keep him awake. It will make him doubt everything he knows about fighting. And tomorrow, when we face each other for the last time, that fear will be his enemy as much as I am." Stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Sometimes I forget that you are not just a fighter, you are a predator." "We all are," Danny said. "Every human is. We just learn to hide it behind civilization." He began walking toward his quarters, each step sending pain through his damaged body. "Tomorrow, I will stop hiding it." Behind him, the arena was already buzzing with speculation about round 3. The odds had shifted again. They were now even, 50-50, a bet that no one would have believed possible 2 days ago. Somewhere in the station, the Unbroken sat alone in darkness, replaying the round in his mind. He had hurt the human badly. He had been stronger, faster, and more skilled. And he had still seen that look in the human's eyes, that refusal to yield, that willingness to suffer any pain in pursuit of victory. for the first time in his long career, was not certain he would win. The morning of round 3 brought a strange quiet to station. The usual noise of commerce and entertainment had faded as every creature on the station prepared to watch the final confrontation. Shops closed early. Work schedules were abandoned. Even the docking bays fell silent as ship crews gathered around screens to witness what many were calling the most important moment in galactic sports history. Danny Cole stood in his quarters, looking at his reflection in the polished metal wall. His face was swollen and bruised. His torso was wrapped in bandages that hid the damage to his ribs. Every breath brought a sharp reminder of the beating he had taken in round 2. The station's medical officers had recommended immediate surgery. He had refused. Santos entered without knocking. She had stopped sleeping sometime during the night, and the exhaustion showed in her face. She carried a data pad that displayed thousands of messages. "The odds are even," she said. 50-50. There has never been a championship match with even odds. The gamblers do not know what to do. Danny nodded, but did not turn from his reflection. "I told about his bribe offer," continued. "I made sure the story reached the news networks. He cannot touch you now without proving that he was trying to fix the tournament." She paused. "He looked like he wanted to kill me." "He might try after this is over," Danny said quietly. "Let him try," moved to stand beside him. "How do you feel?" Danny finally turned to look at her. His calm brown eyes held something she had not seen before. It was not determination or focus or calculation. It was hunger, pure and primal and ancient. "I feel like a human," he said. "I feel like my ancestors who faced lions with nothing but sticks and stones. I feel like every generation that survived something that should have destroyed us." He smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "I feel like winning." The arena was beyond capacity. Every floating pod was full. Every standing area was packed. The broadcast networks reported that 8 billion viewers were watching across the galaxy. It was the largest audience for any event in recorded history. Danny walked through the tunnel one final time. The crowd did not laugh. They did not mock. They watched him in absolute silence, knowing they were witnessing something that would be remembered for generations. Waited in the arena. The champion had not slept. His eyes were red with exhaustion and something deeper. He had spent the entire night trying to understand how he had come to fear a creature half his size. He had failed. The two fighters took their positions. Commissioner announced the rules for the final round. The match would continue until one fighter could not continue or surrendered. There would be no time limit. There would be no interruptions. This would end only when one of them broke. The signal came. Attacked with everything he had. He abandoned all defense, all caution, all strategy. He threw himself at Danny with the full force of his massive body, all 4 arms swinging in devastating arcs. He had decided that the only way to defeat the human was to overwhelm him completely before his endurance could become a factor. Danny did not retreat. He did not dodge. He did something that made the entire galaxy gasp in shock. He let grab him. The champion's arms closed around Danny's body like a cage of iron. This was the grip that had killed dozens of opponents. This was the technique that no creature had ever escaped. Began to squeeze, expecting to hear the crack of breaking bones. But Danny was already moving. He had let grab him because he needed to be inside the champion's guard. He needed to be close enough to reach the targets that had protected so carefully throughout round 2. His hands found the neural clusters. His fingers struck with precision born from hours of study and years of training. He hit the same points he had targeted in round 1, but he also hit new targets, points he had identified when physicians' medical examination was broadcast to the galaxy. His grip weakened. His arms began to fail, but Danny did not pull away. Instead, he locked his legs around the champion's massive torso and held on. They fell together, crashing to the arena floor with an impact that shook the entire structure. Danny maintained his position, clinging to like a predator that refused to release its prey. His ribs screamed in agony. His damaged body protested every movement. He did not care. On the ground, Danny applied a submission hold that he had learned in the underground fighting rings of Titan. It was a technique that used leverage instead of strength, a way for a smaller creature to control a larger one. He wrapped his arms around his neck and squeezed. Thrashed and roared. He tried to pry Danny loose with his failing arms. He rolled across the arena floor, slamming the human against the hard surface again and again. But Danny would not let go. He absorbed the punishment and kept squeezing. The crowd watched in disbelief as the mighty champion struggled helplessly against a creature that should have been crushed in seconds. They watched as movements became weaker, as his roars became whimpers, as the unbroken warrior finally faced something he could not overcome. The end came not with a crash but with a word. A single word, spoken through the arena speakers for 8 billion creatures to hear. A word that the Unbroken had never spoken in 47 cycles of competition. Yield. Danny released his hold and rolled away. He lay on the arena floor staring up at the lights, his body broken and exhausted, but he was smiling. The silence lasted for 3 long seconds, then the arena exploded. The cheers came from species that had never cheered for anyone outside their own kind. They came from creatures who had spent their lives believing that humans were weak and fragile and insignificant. They came from every corner of the galaxy, from billions of viewers who had just watched everything they believed get proven wrong. Was the first to reach Danny. She dropped to her knees beside him, tears running freely down her face. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." Danny looked up at her with eyes that could barely focus. "Of course I did. I am human." The ceremony that followed was a blur of noise and movement. Danny stood on the champion's platform, barely able to remain upright, while Commissioner placed the championship medallion around his neck. The ancient's face was unreadable, but his hands trembled as he performed the duty. "Congratulations," said stiffly. "You have earned this." Danny nodded. "Yes, I have." Physician pushed through the crowd to tend to his injuries. "You should be dead," she told him as she examined his broken ribs. "By every measure we have, you should have died in round 2. "Humans are difficult to kill," Danny said. "We have had a lot of practice surviving." The young warrior knelt before Danny one final time. "Teacher," he said, "I wish to learn from you. I wish to understand how humans fight." Danny placed a hand on the young warrior's shoulder. "You do not want to learn how humans fight. You want to learn how humans think. That is what makes us dangerous." He helped to his feet. "Come visit Earth someday. See the planet that created us. Then you will understand." That evening showed Danny the messages that were flooding in from across the galaxy. Thousands of young fighters wanted to train with humans. Scientists wanted to study human physiology. Diplomats wanted to discuss new treaties. The species that had been laughed at for 80 years was suddenly the most interesting civilization in known space. "You did more than win a tournament," said. "You changed how they see us." Danny watched the messages scroll past on the screen. Somewhere out there, billions of creatures were talking about what they had witnessed. They were questioning their assumptions about strength and weakness. They were wondering what else they had been wrong about. "I did what our species has always done," Danny said. "I refused to give up. I refused to accept that I was supposed to lose." He turned to look out the window at the stars. "That is all any human has ever done. Face the thing that is trying to destroy us and keep fighting until we win." The news broadcast played in the background, showing clips from the final round. The commentator was describing how human fight training had become the most sought-after skill in the galactic core. How the species once mocked as weaklings were now regarded as the most dangerous fighters in known space. Moved to stand beside Danny at the window. "What now?" Danny smiled, and for the first time since the tournament began, there was warmth in it. "Now we go home. We tell our people what we learned here. We show them that the galaxy is not something to fear." He looked at her. "And we wait for the next challenger, because they will come. They will always come. And when they do..." Danny's smile widened. "We do what we have always done. We endure, we adapt, we survive." He turned back to the stars. "And we win." Behind them, the broadcast showed the final image of the tournament. Danny standing over the fallen champion, bloodied and broken but unbowed. A single human against the might of the galaxy. And the galaxy had blinked first.